Hi and welcome back. In this lecture we're going to be talking all about editing. Whether you're having someone else edit your work or whether you have to do it yourself, I'm going to give you a lot of tips and tricks for how to get that done correctly. Now, as I've mentioned before, I'll forgive blog and website writers for a lot of grammatical errors if they offer me useful or interesting content. That being said, I'll give them a lot more respect and will feel a lot more appreciated as a reader if they have taken the time to make the reading easier for me by editing their content thoroughly. While I may be lenient when it comes to grammatical errors, many intelligent, well-educated people are not so lenient. A lot of people will lose interest in your content immediately if you make them stumble across simple errors that you could and should have taken the time to easily correct. To put things simply, edit your content well and make the brand of you as good as it can be. Here are 5 things to look for while editing. Number 1, spelling. We've already covered this one quite a bit, but use your spell check, and if you're unsure whether spell check is right, look it up. You also need to be especially careful to look for misspelled words that spell checker misses because it's a word but the wrong word. For instance, if I type, "I took a ride in the care," C-A-R-E. Spell check won't see that because care is a correctly spelled word. It just isn't the right word for your context. So you need to proofread meticulously to look for those types of mistakes. Number 2 is grammar and sentence structure. I'm not going to lie, grammar can be tough. But if you're like me and you struggle with getting your grammar perfect, let me recommend a great little book. It's called The Elements of Style by Strunk and White. This is a little book that will make a big impact on your ability to use grammar. And if you don't want to get the book, you can honestly just go online and find help with just about any grammar issue that you can imagine. Pick the 1 or 2 things that you really struggle with the most and commit yourself right now to learning more about it. Little improvements in your grammar can go a long ways in the end. Most importantly, remember that no one is perfect. In fact, some of the most famous writers have done some pretty weird stuff with language, and none of them were burned at the stake for it. Well, at least not very many of them. Just don't let your imperfect grammar keep you from sharing your writing with the world. Your valuable message is more important than your perfect writing. If you just can't bear even one mistake, get a good editor to fix them for you. There, you're done. Next, you need to edit for voice and tone. So you've spent a lot of time working out your individual voice and you've written your piece. But did you lose your voice anywhere along the way? Reading your work out loud or having someone else edit it for your voice can be a great help. You might just catch one paragraph or one section where you were tired and you slipped up into an unfamiliar voice. That happens to the best of us, but you want to catch that so you don't throw your readers off. While you're editing for voice, check your tone throughout the piece as well. Make sure that the tone for any given section fits the content and what you're trying to convey. Does it sound too boring or monotone? Are you overly excited when you're talking about those safety warnings? If so, ramp it up or tone it down and keep your readers more engaged. The next one is value. If you only learn one thing from this entire course, please let it be this. Make your content valuable. The perfect subject and all the perfect grammar and flow and varied sentence structure in the world isn't worth anything if you don't provide value to your reader. Now, before you edit your work, take a moment to reevaluate your potential audience. What do they need? What do they most desire? What are their problems? Keep these 3 questions in mind as you read your book. Are there ways you can better serve your audience? Is there additional content you need to add? Are there outside resources that would be helpful to them? Will examples or stories help keep them engaged and inspired? The next thing you need to edit for is flow. Take a visual look through your finished piece. Just scan down the page or the pages. Are there elements that help draw your eye along, like headings or images, quotes or subtitles? If not, add them. Second, is there a section in the content that doesn't have a smooth flow into the next section? Do you need to rewrite it or add a transition sentence or 2 to bridge the gap? In the following example, the text jumps straight from talking about dieting to talking about exercise. Here goes. The low-carb diet can really help you to shed that belly fat and get looking your best. Your workout should include a lot of high rep, low weight exercises. You see how that just jumped right into the next section there? To fix this, add a transition sentence so that the reader has a heads up as to where you're headed next, like this. The low-carb diet can really help you shed that belly fat and get looking your best. In fact, if you want to really kick your weight loss into high gear, how about adding some exercises to your diet? The ideal workout should include a lot of high-rep, low-weight exercises. So you see how I put that sentence in there to essentially draw you along into the next idea, the next separate idea. Let's talk about one thing that I think is very important as a publisher and editor, and that is communicating with your editor. If you're working with an editor, you have to communicate with them correctly. If you just give them your content and let them edit however they see fit, they are not likely to do what you need. The purpose of editing is to revise and improve the writing. In fact, the definition according to dictionary.com is to prepare text for publication by checking and improving its accuracy, clarity, etc. So you can see that quality editing involves much more than just proofreading, which is basically just checking for spelling and grammar mistakes. In addition to spelling and grammar, editing involves revising voice and tone, flow, and value. A good editor will understand this, but good editors can also be very expensive. If you're writing blog posts, I'm assuming that you don't want to pay a ton of money for a professional editor. Still, you can find someone who is intelligent and literate to edit your work without having to pay them a fortune. You just need to be very clear with them about exactly what you want them to edit in your work. Make sure they understand the difference between editing and proofreading. I should say editing and just proofreading. Tell them specifically to look for the 5 elements from the previous lecture: spelling, grammar, voice and tone, flow, and value. You might also have to define what each item means for them so that they understand exactly what you're looking for. Finally, highlight any additional concerns you may have. For example, maybe you're struggling with your conclusion. You're not sure whether it clearly summarizes your content. Tell your editor to pay special attention to that specific issue and then advise you accordingly. And finally, let's talk about self-editing. I recommend that you don't self-edit if you can possibly avoid it. But I understand that finding or paying an editor is not possible for many people, especially when you're first starting out. If you absolutely must self-edit your work, here are a few tips. First, write and rewrite the work until you feel really good about what you have. Then, set it aside for as long as you can manage. 2 weeks is ideal, longer is even great. If it's a time-sensitive blog post, you can probably get away with a week, but that's kind of the minimum I would recommend. Now, the purpose of setting it aside is to give your brain time to separate from the writing. See, when we're entrenched in the writing process, it can be difficult to separate the ideas in our heads from what we put on paper. This makes it really hard to see your own mistakes because your brain will fill in the gaps for you. When you take 2 weeks away from the writing, it allows you to see the writing with fresh eyes. You're now able to read the concepts with a more objective perspective, and the mistakes and shortcomings of the writing are much more obvious. Now you can self-edit and publish your work without the fear of missing major issues due to writer's blindness. Now, one other thing that you can try in self-editing is to read your writing out loud. This does a similar thing to your brain as the previous example. It allows your brain to hear the words from a fresh perspective, and often mistakes will stand out much better. It also allows you to edit for conversational flow to make sure that your writing doesn't sound too stiff when the reader goes to read it. So those are some important strategies for how to edit, what to edit for, and how to communicate with your editor.